I'm Matthew W. Quinn. You're listening to the Fandom Squad podcast.
Hey everyone, this is going to be another episode of the Phantom Squad podcast. My awesome guest this week is author Matthew Quinn. How's it going?
Fine. How are you doing today?
Doing good, doing good. Thank you for coming on the show.
You're welcome.
Now, the first thing I wanted to ask you, so when you started to come up for the concept for your books, how did that come about? Was you already like starting as like a writer sort of thing, like a journalist, or did you just kind of just get into story?
Well, I remember writing my own little stories probably as early as preschool. My grandmother had an electric typewriter, very old fashioned, and I'd write stories on that. So that was the late 80s.
Oh, cool.
And the first story I sent to try and somewhere would pay me for was I was in high school. I was probably a junior. My first rejection slip was dated September 11th, 2001.
Oh, wow.
That was
Oh, that is crazy. Just that
yes.
timing.
Yeah, and the guy's office was in Hoboken, New Jersey, so he was pretty close to it too.
So for your first story, the first book you put out, how did that concept come about? Where did the character come about? And like, can you explain this kind of the plot of the first book that you came out with?
Okay, the first book that came out was The Thing in the Woods. That's like a Lovecraft style horror novel set in rural Georgia. That one came around because I was visiting the Borders in East Cobb. Rest in peace, Borders. And I was reading the Call of Cthulhu manual. I've never really been into playing RPGs, but I like the lore. So they came up with a scenario, what happens when the Lovecraft country, the rural inbred areas where they worship the horrors from beyond, what happens that gets suburbanized? Once upon a time, there was this town called Love Canal where they built an elementary school on top of a long abandoned toxic waste dump. So that was the metaphor they used.
That's a cool concept. When I first got it from you, you were telling me that at the con, I read it, and it's very it's a new take on it that's very interesting, and it's like I said, I enjoyed the book so far.
So you've read the first one. Have you read the second one?
I have not. I'm still in the process of reading the first one.
I'd ask who's dead yet, but that might start getting into spoilers. So
So from that concept, so how did you know? I know how the for the first book, when did you had the original for the? Because I know it's three books, correct, from the series.
The Thing in the Woods, there's a sequel, The Atlanta Incursion, and I'm done with Serpent Sword, the second main book in the Battle for the Wastelands steampunk series. I'm going to start working on the third book, The Walking Worm. There's Battle for the Wastelands, the prequel novella, Son of Grendel, and the one that just came out is on Amazon now is Serpent Sword.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I think that's the one we were talking about. We were trying to wait a little bit for it to come out so we could help promote that one too. So for the concept for those, how did that come about? Was it you already had the idea and kind of just fleshed it out, or how did did you was it inspired by certain things?
When I was, my dad always had a lot of Stephen King books, and I was in high school. He let me read them, and so one of the books I read was The Gunslinger. Have you read The Gunslinger?
I have not. I've a lot of the I know a lot of his main stuff. I haven't read that one. I just read the Pet Cemetery is my favorite one that I've read recently. I went back on, but I haven't read Gunslinger. I've heard good things about it though.
Yeah, so The Gunslinger is set in a world that's heavily implied to be some kind of post-apocalyptic world. The world has moved on, and the gunslingers like the warrior class, and they have very rare fire. So I was reading it. I remember I got it associated with my church group basketball league's coach's funeral. That I probably had one of the very earliest versions. So we're probably talking my sophomore year of high school. And so basically it's the Dark Tower meets Game of Thrones.
Sweet. That sounds awesome.
Yes, I mean, over the year, it started out much more fantastically. Like guns were rare and people didn't have last names. It was like the society had almost reverted to like a medieval state. But over the years, just mutated until it turned into full on steampunk.
Sweet. So did it also kind of have like a steampunkish kind of mix between because I know it's that same realm. Was it kind of like steampunk also meets like Road Warrior, Mad Max kind of feel?
Probably, although the only Mad Max movie I've actually seen is Fury Road. So it's not clear. It's in Fury Road. I don't think takes place that long after the apocalypse. Like Immortan Joe still has his army medals from when he was Colonel Joe Moore in the Australian Army. So Battle
Oh
for the
yeah.
Wastelands takes place hundreds of years after the event I've only vaguely described as the fall.
Oh, okay, okay, yeah, yeah. I think yeah, the older films are the ones that are more like years and years later. The new one is definitely like it's more fresh. I think it's actually a prequel to the Mel Gibson films. But yeah,
That
that's
makes sense. That might make a bit of sense chronologically. I think in the first one, society has not collapsed yet, but it's getting there. And the second and third one were definitely in post-nuclear barbarian territory.
yes, for sure. It's like I say, especially the one that I've always, Road Warriors. That's you definitely have the barbarian, the medieval, everybody dressing basically like biker slash, apocalyptic warrior type.
Yeah. So mine. How familiar are you with world history?
I'm a big history nut.
Yeah. So this is hundreds of years after the fall, and Grendel, first Lord of the Northlands, is Charlemagne if he were a much bigger jerk, or the first emperor of China, Qin Shi Huangdi. The dude who puts an end to centuries of civil war and unrest with the autocratic iron fist.
Yes, 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 yes.
And he's based in looks like, have you seen Highlander?
Yes, I love Highlander.
He's sort of an updated version of the medieval Kurgan. Like he's got the tiger skull helmet, but that kind of outfit wouldn't work for an age of guns. So he's got kind of like a metal trench coat. I think it's called a brigadine, and he carries around what we recognize an M16. And he has a battle axe made out of one of his enemy's spines, but that's more for ceremonial, for showing off.
Awesome. That sounds amazing. Now, with a lot of the stuff you described, have you ever thought about taking like your books and stuff, making like a graphic novel? Because that would like the visuals would be amazing for that. Because I know your writing is great too, and just your way you describe things mixed with like a graphic design, like a graphic novel version. Have you ever thought about like doing that as a concept?
Not really. I mean, I might start somewhat small with Thing in the Woods as a graphic novel because that is relatively self-contained and relatively short.
Yeah, that like I said, I know because I know sometimes it can be a lot harder, taking, the written and turning it into a visual thing. So yeah, that's starting out with something a little bit lighter than, the main books. Now, one that I definitely want to talk about that definitely I got at the con that was a big interest to me was the Little People Big Guns. Can you tell the audience a little bit about that one?
Oh boy, that's a story. I spend way too much time on social media, and going around out there in the interwebs is a story about how TV chef Gordon Ramsay's gay dwarf porn star lookalike was found dead in a badger den somewhere in England. And soon afterwards, I think it was the Huffington Post, I think, they investigated and they said, we have no record of this man existing. And the police department in the town where this supposedly takes place had never heard of this case. It turns out this was a parody article from a British tabloid called the Sunday Sport that had somehow gone viral, and a lot of major newspapers and wire services thought it was real.
My God.
So there's an expression, a lie can go half around the world before the truth is finished putting on its shoes. And you search that story every few years, somebody picks up and runs with it again. So it is almost certainly not true.
So
But my creative wheels were going, and I had gotten a volunteer gig at the World Horror Conference in Atlanta in 2015, thanks to Anya Martin. And I managed to pitch the concept. At that point, it was just killer badgers and little people. And I pitched that to Jeff Burke from Deadite Press. They're a small press in Portland that does extreme horror. And he thought it was funniest thing he'd ever heard. But the stuff with the little people and the killer badgers, that sounded like to him only the first third of the story. What happens next? So I just made up on the spot. Well, I'm not gonna that's get a little spoilery. There is a human threat behind the badgers, and that's the rest of the book.
Yeah, definitely. As soon as you told me when I was asking about the covers and the titles, and you explained the little people badger thing, I was like, yeah, that is hilarious. I definitely want to take a gander at that one.
Yeah, I'm thinking it'd be nice if it was adapted to a movie. It was required that all the little people characters be played by actual little people. That way, they're guaranteed jobs.
Oh yeah, because I think before, like somebody like Peter Dinklage who does like made it where you can be a little person and do non-little people roles. Like I think mainly a lot of them got or elves or or like in the Wizard of Oz is like the Munchkins and stuff. They didn't have a lot of roles until him and some other people like broke the mold.
Yeah,
But yeah,
yeah,
definitely that is something I could definitely see that book as being a one of those B horror movies that you're like it becomes an instant cult classic.
it'd be like Cocaine Bear, some sort of something so absolutely gonzo.
Yes. Which I just recently seen that film. It is, oh God, it's so good. It's a lot better than it should be. And it is so hilarious.
Yeah, I'm glad that Hollywood is making some original movies for once. I hope it makes all its money. So everyone go out there and see Cocaine Bear.
Yes, and especially here, he's glad that it's made in Georgia, back in our backyard.
Yeah, it takes place on like the story. It's very loosely based on actually took place either North Georgia or South Tennessee.
Oh yeah,
Like
my
the dead bear, I think
fiance
was found around Blood Mountain.
oh yeah, where it took place at, my fiance, her family actually like years ago were used to camping there a lot of the time. So she's actually been to the place where it happened like in the early like 2000s when she was a little girl. So she was like, "Yeah, I remember
Yeah.
that pavilion and I remember that." And I'm like, "Wait a minute, this is a real place?" And she was like, "Yeah, this actually happened at a real park here in Georgia. It's near it's right there near like the Georgia Tennessee line."
Because I think the dead guy in the driveway was in Tennessee and the bear was in North Georgia.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Because it's one of those. It's the real story. A lot of people don't know. Like the real story, it wasn't like the bear. There was some attacks, but the bear. It actually what happened is they found the bear dead because like it literally just OD'd on cocaine, and somebody found it, and they just took the concept and went from there. But the rabid bear, all the shenanigans that happened in the film without spoiling it 90% of that was made up for comic relief. And the especially there's a scene with some cubs and those that wasn't part of the actual event. It was just the bear itself was found the drugs that were dropped by the actual guy. The thing you're talking about with the guy in the driveway, that yeah, all of that was a real thing. And which is crazy to in hindsight. You're like, wow, that's I know this is for a dark comedy film, but like the fact that it's real events, loosely based, but some of it actually like there's a scene where they show like a news report and it's actually the real life news report. I think it was either Fox or CNN that they show, and it was the actual news report from the time that it happened.
Have you read Little People Big Guns yet?
I read a few bits, but I read like the first chapter of it.
There are some Cocaine Bear esque shenanigans. Those happen much later in the story.
I'm definitely looking forward to those shenanigans because that's definitely, like I said, that's definitely my type of humor. Is that if it's super gory and it's funny at the same time, it's a win-win for me. So have you thought about creating any have you had any other ideas or creating anything else that's like in that same horror comedy genre? Because I know majority of yours is no you more serious than horror comedy. Because I know you did the one book. Have you had any other ideas for any like more horror comedy stuff?
Well, I have an idea. Sorry, my brain went off. I'm a high school teacher, but last summer I didn't do summer school. I was hoping I could finish Serpent Sword. It ended up happening about 9 months later than it should have. But I also wrote a big chunk of another idea called Praying Mantis, Preying, where the idea is that somewhere in rural West Florida, somebody was dumping their meth lab equipment in a swamp, and little bugs eat the meth and the bigger bugs eat the little bugs. It goes up the food chain to end up with deformed praying mantises about the size of a human that can kill a cow.
That sounds amazing. That sounds
So
definitely up
just
my
in,
alley.
so just in time for some kids from Orlando to come to this small town for spring break, because I never use the word COVID, but it's kind of implied that everything else is closed, so everybody is going to Florida for spring break. So the closest they can find, because so all the Destin and Sandestin and all those are so super crowded. They're in this little small town, the Panhandle. No one ever goes. Although I think it's set somewhere in 2022 because one of the characters is a local rancher who's an Afghan vet, and so he's just sitting around bitter about the fall of Kabul. So I mean, I do try and throw in some social commentary, just like there actually is some social commentary in Little People, Big Guns. But a lot of this is just trauma level insanity. I'm probably about a third done with it because we'll probably be at Little People, Big Guns length, or maybe a little longer.
Sounds amazing. That's definitely up my alley. And like, the concept that's something I haven't heard before. It's a lot like it seems like, that I forget the name of the author. I think it has that weird German name where the people start turning into the mutants and stuff. It reminds me of that. What is the name of that? They made a episode based on his name from Rick and Morty. They made a world about it. Um, but it reminds me of that
Kafka,
type
where he
of.
turns into a bug.
Yes, 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 yes. I forget the name of the author, but there was a what is his name?
The Metamorphosis was by Kafka, and a dude turns into a giant either roach or dung beetle. It's not totally clear.
Yeah, yeah, that one. And it's that concept of that guy, and just that it reminds me of that mixed with that comedy horror of the giant bug eating the the dumb innocent spring breaker kids. And especially being in Florida, that's one of those Florida man headlines that you're like, okay, that seems like it's not real, but it probably could actually happen.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to throw in some Florida man jokes in there too, because Florida has really liberal open records laws. So if you're a newspaper and you need something urgent, just look up a true crime story from Florida. That's why it's always Florida man or Florida woman.
And it's definitely like, especially with the meth drop, that is like I said, that goes hand in hand, because it's usually somebody ate meth or bath salts and did some crazy stuff.
Yeah, because I was working for a newspaper in Alpharetta, Georgia, a few years ago. And by a few, I mean, we're talking like 2011, 2012 here. And I remember around that time, someone in Florida had consumed bath salts and like chewed someone's face off. So there were probably soon afterwards a bunch of bath salts zombies trash books.
Like bath salt Walking Dead, that would be a new concept. It's instead of a virus, it's just somebody ate bath salts and started eating people. That is a concept I would love to see somebody take on the new the I wouldn't say new, it's more the zombie genre. I know it's gotten big here like past 10 years, like even though it's been around since the 40s with Night of the Living Dead. It's got a new resurgence here recently, but I would love to see some new take on the zombie virus, because we've seen how The Walking Dead did it. 28 days later, it would be cool to see a comedy, sort of a what is the sort of like Shaun of the Dead, taking that zombie horror and turning into like a horror comedy. That would definitely be a good one with the bath salts.
Oh, there actually is a 2013 movie called Bath Salt Zombies.
Oh my god. I have to look that up. You'll have to send me that, because that is I'll have to that's definitely I'll have to check into that and check that out, because my fiance she's more the horror fan than me. I'm more the sci-fi nerd. And so how she got me into a lot of the horror is she introduced me to the horror comedy genre with the Leprechaun series. And so I was like, okay, I can get into these movies if they're anything like this.
Oh, that reminds me, I'm a regular participant in a film podcast called Myopia Movies. We watch childhood movies, see if they're still good. So we had one episode on Leprechaun in Space. This is the fourth one.
Oh God, yeah, that was the second one she showed me. She showed me Leprechaun 3 where it's at the casino, and then we watched Leprechaun in Space. So, oh God, you have to tell me
You can
what you
tell a
guys
franchise.
concluded on.
You can tell a franchise is in decline. It goes into space, like Jason X, Hellraiser Bloodline, which is the last one in theaters, and Leprechaun in Space. I think Leprechaun in the Hood were direct to video.
Oh yeah, I'm pretty sure because I always thought I got a Leprechaun in the Hood and Tales from the Hood mixed up, and she was like, "No, no, no, no. One is actually good, and one is terrible."
Tales from the Hood. I remember seeing previews for it, something called the Preview Channel, where that you it was a TV channel. You had cable. You could watch movie trailers, and that's where you saw what was available on pay per view. So Tales from the Hood is the early '90s.
Oh yeah, the reason how I saw it is I saw a couple of the somebody used I guess the picture of him as a meme as Samuel Jackson's character in that movie, and so I was like, wait a minute, is that Samuel Jackson? What is that? I've never seen him in like a vampire role. And then my fiance was like, yeah, that's Tales from the Hood, and I was like, okay, you got to show me this film. I need to see this.
And Samuel L. Jackson played a lot more characters back then than just bad dudes. Like he was Mr. Arnold, the scientist in Jurassic Park, and he was whatever this vampire character was. Now he's like Nick Fury, Mace Windu, and the dude on Snakes on a Plane. I'm just gonna
Yes.
curse and kill people.
Oh yeah, it's I always make the joke of my fiance is like, stop it. I'm like, no, I will never, never, never not be that. So if we go to the store and because I'm a big Star Wars nut myself, if we go to the store and I see a Mace Windu lightsaber, I always call it the motherfucker lightsaber. And she's like, oh my God. I'm like, it is the motherfucker lightsaber, okay?
And for beating down Grandpa Satan with
Yes.
before emo Antichrist had to get in the way.
Exactly. Yes. Oh God. These I told somebody I was like, I'm a Star Wars fan, but these new films, I just it's one of those things like I still love the franchise, but I can't get into the new stuff. It's just they took a route that I'm like, you shouldn't have gone there. That's not at all what you should have
They
done.
they should have adapted the Thrawn books. That would be easier, but then you'd have to have all the original cast.
Oh yeah,
So
there's a book I bought a couple of years ago that I would love to see the story. I can't remember the name of the title, but it's the one where Luke goes on an adventure with this I think he's a Jedi or something, but he's like a tiger guy. And it's from like the early I think it's like from like 1993, and I picked it up at a trade show just because I like the cover on it. And that storyline I'd love to see, it was kind of like took the concept of I wouldn't say the Mandalorian, but it was sort of that solo adventure type thing where it wasn't just like, oh, it has to do back to the Skywalker family line and all this crap. It was just like, hey, Luke's a Jedi. Luke's a Jedi now, and he's on adventures doing Jedi stuff. And I would love to see that. That's why I enjoy, the Rebel series and the Clone Wars series outside of the main films because it gives you that that adventure without everything having to be back relayed to the Skywalkers. So for you, what is some things I also like to ask because I can tell you're into the same stuff. What are some of the other like franchises stuff besides like Star Wars and the main stuff? What are some of the other like geek stuff that you're into? I always say like, what's your top three fandoms or like your honorable mentions? What are some of your other geek stuff that you're into?
well, I did watch Game of Thrones all the way to the next to last episode, and that made me so angry that I didn't even bother with the last episode. My high school was having its graduation that night, so duty called.
I read the books because I was also a Tolkien fan, and I love Lord of the Rings and everything Tolkien did. And somebody told me about getting into games, and I read the books, and I was just the series was okay, but I didn't like it as much. And then when they said the ending was terrible, I was like, yeah, I'm not gonna go 5 years into this just to be unsatisfied at the end.
Yeah, I think I think that there's now that people know the ending of the show. There's some you can read back in the books and look at some hints are going to happen. but I think a lot of stuff is going to happen differently.
But always recommend, I guess it goes back, you being an author, I always go back to, the shows and stuff are great, but if you can, start with the source material, go to the books first, so you get the story that the creator wanted you to get in the first place, because there's a lot of stuff that when it goes to film or it goes to outside of, written, there's a lot of things that have to be cut for financial reasons. So I definitely, always tell people go back to the book source first, and get the original ideas and the way this story was supposed to be, what the creator wanted you to read first.
Well, to be fair, like the MCU movies, a lot of the comics are based on are completely silly. So they've kind of made it more grounded for the MCU movies. I think that's somewhat better. Like Ulysses Claw in the comics is like a being of pure sound. And in here, he's just Andy Circus listening to Afrikaner folk music and selling people guns.
Oh yeah, it's the, like I try to tell somebody too, when it goes back to that too, I own the Gauntlet series, which a lot of people don't realize the Gauntlet series is what, Endgame and all those films are loosely based on, from like 1995, that had, where it had Thanos came in and was taking over. So they kind of took that concept of, it wasn't as dark as they did in Endgame. It was more, like you said, more that lighter, whimsical sort of thing that they did in the comics, because as people sometimes forget, comics are initially for kids. Some of them are made for adults. There are ones like, I definitely would not recommend your child reading Watchmen by themselves if they're under the age of 13. But some of them, majority of them are mainly for, and are rated E for everyone. Unlike, the Marvel films that can be a little more dark and, more adult themed than, the original source material. So yeah, I agree with you on that one. That it definitely depends on, where you're coming from and how you can change things. Like I know for Polka Dot Man in the new Suicide Squad movie, Polka Dot Man is, just a generic background character that, is a throw off character in the comic series. But I love the way that they took those, James Gunn took the liberty of Polka Dot Man and gave us this other character in the film that, I fell in love with Polka Dot Man. I never thought I'd say those words because like I said, I wasn't really a fan of him in the comics.
Quote the great George Takei. Oh my.
Yes. Taking those characters, and making something new. So sometimes it just depends on, who's leading the ship, whether they can take the source material and make something great, or, have a overlord like HBO ruin it because somebody, was pushing on time. It's like, hey, we got to get this out. We can't do this drawn out scene that you want and ruin the fan base.
Yeah, I saw the ending. I don't say I saw the ending happen as it happened, but it was clear they were setting up Daenerys to lose it. Like, oh, all her support system is getting killed or betraying her, up to having her best friend have her head chopped off in front of her.
Oh
And
yeah.
her advisor just pretty openly ditching her to help his brother and sister escape. So yeah, someone who already has a family history of issues
Oh yeah, and which I'm glad that
is going
they
to just go completely crazy.
oh yeah. And I'm glad that, they took they took, that what the love of that show, and they gave us House of the Dragon. I've seen bits and pieces. I haven't fully watched the series yet because I'm kind of still iffy about it. The only one of the main reasons I want to get into it is a lot of people who listen to me on the show know I'm a Doctor Who fan. And so there's two actors in that show, which is Matt Smith, who plays in it. And then a lot of people don't know this too, that I forget his name in the new series, but the kid with the teenager with the long blonde curly hair is actually the son of David Tennant, who is the 10th Doctor, and his wife, who was also in Doctor Who. So I wanted to get into the show because of, the actors from Doctor Who.
Yeah, and I think Tennant's wife is a daughter of an earlier doctor. So I mean, it just
Yes.
like get out the strings and the pin board.
Oh yeah, there's a whole fan theory because it's funny because in the episode that where her and David Tennant actually met before, when they met before they started dating, uh she plays his daughter in the episode because he sticks his hand in this machine and it takes his DNA and creates this like soldier because there's a machine that they needed, instant soldiers. So they would take DNA from people, make an instant soldier. So in the episode, she becomes his daughter and they now have a daughter together. So there's the fan theory of she's the doctor's daughter of the doctor's daughter of the doctor's daughter of the doctor's daughter.
Inception.
Yes, which is absolutely hilarious. Which then there's another layer because the I was like, David, I think you knew what you were doing because the guy who is her dad, who is the doctor, David was he was actually a fan. It was his favorite doctor as a kid. When so I'm like, dude, not only is your favorite doctor your father-in-law, you are now dating his daughter. So he's actually your family. So now he's actually your family through marriage and just because you both are family through working on Doctor Who as the same character, like
Yeah, I
decades
watched Doctor
apart.
Who for a bit because my uncle had some of these Doctor Who novels from the 70s. I remember reading one because Little and Love Dinosaurs, and so it has a dinosaur on the cover.
Oh yeah,
But
I
my
love
favorite
that series.
but my favorite Doctor is always the ninth. You know, the leather jacket's cool and he acts like a dude who's 10,000 years old who killed off his own species.
Oh yeah, there's one scene my buddy showed me, and I'm like, oh dude, that is dark, but I love that. There's a in one of the episodes where he's facing the Dalek, and they're like, "What is your plan? What do you mean you can't do this without killing people?" And he's like, "You know what you need to do that would help this entire galaxy is just kill yourself." And I'm like, "Whoa, dude, holy crap!" You definitely, I can tell just from that saying you're a guy who's seen some stuff, you know
Yeah,
that you're,
so I like the
yeah.
ninth. I did stick around for some of the 10th, but I think I lost interest at some point. I never saw Matt Smith, the 11th.
Oh yeah, David, he has like even though he's my favorite, like his doctor, I love his I used to ship him and the character Rose, the blonde chick.
Mm-hmm.
But like a lot of times like I after watching his whole series run as a whole, I prefer his adventures by himself or there's a character named Martha, which Martha doesn't get the love that she deserves. And I think at the time because it was some people back still in 2006 2005 here in America wouldn't accept the doctor being in an interracial relationship, even though in UK that's normal to them. That's normal. It should be normal to everybody, but UK it's more normal than it is over here. And I guess a lot of the fan base didn't like that, but after watching the stories, I prefer him and her because they're dynamic instead of her being the puppy dog. Oh my god, I love you. She gave him some sass and she called him out on his shit when he did something that he was in the wrong, even though you're this alien, this godlike character who's seen and done almost everything. Coming from my perspective, I can show you, some things of, okay, that was, you shouldn't have done it that way, even though you did it like this 1,000 times. There's a different way you can do it in this situation. So I always tell people, like, if you want to experience David's doctor in another way, skip like, you can watch the first 2 seasons, like the first episode of the second season is great. But after that, skip to, him and Martha or him and solo episodes and you'll definitely get to feel more of him as you'll see yes, he is no more the quirky, lover boy doctor, but those episodes solo, you see the darkness of the lonely man, whose race, is completely gone, that he's the last one of his people. And so you'll definitely see there's points in that series, the darkness of the Doctor that you love from the Ninth Doctor, you'll see that in 10. And it's same as there's some ones I can recommend for 11 too, that definitely, if you like the Ninth Doctor aspect, there's episodes where you see that dark Doctor that's not just the whimsical, you know. So besides those, what are some of the other things, some of, some literary authors, or uh books and stuff? What are some of your other ones that you're into, that you like reading, or genres that you like for
Well, I
literary?
like so the Dean Koontz has some good ones. Like it's got like sorry, there's Phantoms, Twilight Eyes, and Watchers. Watchers is one of the super intelligent dog and the monster that gets keep being badly adapted to film. Eyes make a good movie. And when I was in college, I think the last book of Koontz's I read was The Taking, which I think is Alien Invasion, and it's got some really vivid imagery in there.
Oh wow, yeah, that sounds. I'm big into that now. With that too, with that same genre, did you read any of like the Dune books, or the any
I I
Douglas Adams?
I read the first two Hitchhiker's Guide. I think I lost interest partway through three. And I read the first few Dune. I think lost interest somewhere in God Emperor.
I recommend him. He's good. And another one I think you would recommend, if you haven't already read any of his. Are you a fan, or read any of Terry Pratchett stuff?
No, I haven't.
He's the one who he co-wrote, if you ever seen Good Omens or read the Good Omens series, he co-created that with Neil Gaiman. Which Neil Gaiman, I don't are you a fan of Neil Gaiman?
I think I read I think Neverwhere coming back on a plane from Britain. I was in college. I was studying abroad. And I think I read American Gods as well. But I think that's it.
Yeah, those are some of his big ones that are so great. And then when it comes to the comic stuff, I definitely recommend the Sandman series, because it takes the show is great. The show is great. So if you want to watch both of those, the show is, like I said, it's a different tweak to what it was in the comics. Like they changed some of the actors and stuff for, some of the gendered stuff for, to make it, I can't remember exactly why they changed it, but that was a good reason for it. But the Sandman series is another great series that, if you enjoy that genre, I definitely think that you would enjoy his Sandman series, because it takes that, his writings, and puts it into this, this realm of, this character that you've heard about your whole life, the Sandman, and all that lore that, that you've heard your whole life, and takes it and to a new darker twist that you never would, think about. And it's a good read if you've read any of his, like I say, if you've read Neverwhere and you've read American Gods, that's a Sandman. I recommend that one too. Same as Good Omens. It takes, the Antichrist story and flips it on its head, and you have Gaiman with his, universe creating skills, and then you have Pratchett, which is that, that very sci-fi, comicalness. So that dry, dark humor of Terry Pratchett. So you have, that whimsical, dark, world building of Gaiman mixed with, the dark, seeing the comedy, the light and the darkness type comedy from Terry Pratchett. So if you haven't read, like, the series is great with David Tennant and Michael Sheen. If you haven't seen the series is great, but I recommend the book itself. The book is great. And then if you're in the same genre, I recommend the movie is good too, but I highly recommend Ready Player One. That is an amazing book. And there's a sequel to it. I don't know if they're going to do a film for the sequel, but the sequel to
I think
Ready Player
I
One
thought
is
there was a
great.
film. I thought if they made a film, I didn't know they made a book.
Oh yeah, the Ready Player One was originally a book from, like, I think 1989. It's either 86 or 89,
Because
and then into they adapted into a film years later. But there's not a sequel yet for the film, but there is a sequel book that he just came
because
out with.
I swear there was a movie, Ready Player Two. I didn't know there was a book. Oh, there is a book, Ready Player Two. My bad.
Yeah. They made the sequel, but they haven't made the film yet. I would love to see a film if they do it in the way they did the first one. That would be amazing because that was a great adaptation of the book, which they did. They did update some of the things in there because when the book came out, like the pop culture references that are in there were in the book, but some of the outcomes of those pop culture references were not like as what we know them as now because they were just coming out when that book came out, sort of like it's sort of like the Back to the Future thing. Like there was the joke about Jaws number 37 where he gets getting the little holograph eats him coming from the movie theater. But years later, you didn't know. Okay, it wouldn't be Jaws 37; it would be the new Star Wars movie coming out. But at the time, they didn't know that when they did the future scene, so they kind of adapted the Ready Player One book to more fit the outcome of what those pop culture references became years later to what we know them as now. So I definitely recommend if you like the first book, I definitely recommend the sequel to that book. It is awesome.
So you mentioned your fiance is into horror. There's Whitley Strieber wrote a book called The Wolfen that was made into a terrible movie in the 80s, but the book is great.
I think she was telling me about that. That title sounds familiar. Now, when it comes to like the horror books and stuff, were you ever a fan of, were you ever a fan of the Goosebumps series?
When I was a kid, yeah, but I got into horror probably with the what they called the Crestwood Monsters series. They were like kids picture books about like Dracula, the Wolfman, etc., with using stills from the movies. My elementary school library had them. This is the very early 90s. So they would have been relatively new at the time. And also, when I was like in preschool, I wanted to see Gremlins 2 and Arachnophobia. Mom and dad wouldn't let me see them, which is probably a good idea because I saw Gremlins 2 as an adult. And if I wasn't, would if 5-year-old me would not have been, would have, wasn't terrified by the goblins that are played much more scary this time, it would probably be, I would probably been bored to death by like the Trump jokes and Japanese tourist jokes. Those those are so those are adult jokes and they're also really dated.
Oh yeah, that movie is for sure. Like I always recommend. Like yes, I love Gremlins, the first one, but it's the second one. It's definitely got some more haha comedy than more horror in the second one. So I definitely I agree with you. There's a lot of stuff that you're like, I don't know if this is good for children, even though it's supposed to be the more kid friendly one of the two films.
And then they made a commercial for like Mountain Dew or something where you see, Billy is middle aged and he and Gizmo still hanging out and drinking Mountain Dew. And apparently, I guess he and Kate have a kind of goth daughter who has her own little mogwai. And then somebody spills Mountain Dew on Gizmo, and
Oh God,
trouble starts happening again.
I had to
So I'm
look
like, is
that
this a
up.
canonical sequel?
I had to look that up.
Because
I haven't seen that. I have to look that up. I know that they recently did something like that. It was a Reese's Pieces commercial, and it had, the guy who played the little boy in ET, and they had him come in and do like a joke with that. And so I've seen
they
that one.
had Spielberg directed a Comcast commercial where ET returns to Earth and he meets grown up Elliot and Elliot's kids and they sit around playing video games
Yes, that's the one.
on
That's the one.
Comcast.
Yes.
And since
Okay, yeah.
Spielberg's making it and that kid's in it, is that the canonical sequel now?
That's what I was thinking. I'm like, I would love to see that as a, I would love to see that as like a Alf type sequel to the first movie, where basically ET comes back and he's hanging out with Elliot's kids in like an Alf format. Which that show, I don't know if you ever. I've went back and
I think I
watched it
might
on
have seen a
streaming.
bit of the cartoon because I remember there was a cartoon you see Alf flying like a space fighter or something,
Yeah,
but I
they
don't
did it
remember
more
ever
of a.
watching the live action show with the puppet.
Oh yeah, they did. It was like years later after the original series. It was basically like they did Alf doing like fairy tales. So like Robin Hood and Jack and the Beanstalk, and it was so you might have seen that series. I went back because I've heard stories of the original series, and holy crap, that show is it is I know some of the things back then were very raunchy when it came to like being family. Like they had some families that was a lot of adult jokes that the kids didn't get. But you go back and you're like, wait a minute, this kid like puppet is wow. This is
Well,
this
they had
show.
a Beetlejuice kids show that I don't remember my dad liking me watching and then knowing what's in the Beetlejuice movie. I'm really not surprised.
Oh yeah, my fiance, she loves that. She got me into that. I didn't even know there was an animated series of Beetlejuice, and she
Yeah,
showed it
he's
to
sort of
me.
pretending to be Lydia's older cousin who's going to school with her. And so it's more like kid version. So it's not like he's this creepy old man perving on a 13-year-old goth.
Yeah, it's just
And just really
basically
more,
yeah, it's like the more whimsical, not whimsical, it's more the comically, characterized version of, the one in the movie. It's definitely very more kid centric than, how I look at it. It's kind of like how they did did you ever see the 90s Adams Family animated series they had a couple years they
probably
had in the
bits and
90s?
bobs of it. Because I do know there have been a bunch of animated shows. I don't remember which one is which.
This is the one. It's the one that sort of looks like. I think it was like 19. It was like a little bit after the Christina Ricci, Christopher Lloyd film. It was they didn't have the full rights to do anything associated with the movies, but they did that sort of that same thing as the Beetlejuice series. They took the creepy, ness of the show, but also made it sort of a Hanna-Barbera style comedy. So it was more that if you saw the original, you're like, ooh, I don't know about my kid watching this cartoon. And then you watch it and you're like, oh, this is just basically Adam's Family Yogi Bear. It was something like
Is that the
same with
one
the
where they have a friend who's from a really straight laced family who's always wearing a tie?
yes, yes. And Wednesday is I think Wednesday's wearing pink in it. She's not actually wearing like a black dress. They have her dressed in pink in this one.
Oh, ye gods.
Yeah, they have her dressed in pink, and I think they have Gomez in like a purple suit. So it was very more, colorful. Yeah, man, it's one of those things. I see what your dad why your dad would not want you to watch the cartoon knowing the original source material from Beetlejuice. So I definitely see with that. Now think there was I think there was a Gremlins animated series. I want to if they
Well,
didn't, that
well,
would
they're
have been a good concept.
they're trying to make one now for HBO where you see it's like Mr. Wing is an old man and how he meets Gizmo in China in the 20s. Mr. Wing
Oh,
is a young
wow.
man, like even a child. Because assuming he died in like 1990, that's the beginning of Gremlins 2. Um, yeah, because I don't know if they'd be going into the future because I don't think Phoebe Cates wants to do movies anymore.
No, yeah, I don't think she does acting anymore. The last time I seen her, she does a lot of like voice work now for some reason. Like she does a lot of like it's not like what is it? It's not like voiceover like cartoons, but she does a lot of like, audio books and stuff now than being on full camera because and doing that with being like a full-time mom now, she doesn't do anything like, on film.
Yeah, I think she voiced her Gremlins character in something recently.
That's what I'm saying. I think that's what I remember because you would think too, with I guess with Stranger Things going on, like all those people who were famous in the '80s, you would think that she would come out of retirement, but I guess she just then they didn't come up with a role for her or something because she was a big part of there's the actual '80s reference to her of the red swimsuit thing that everybody knows, which I found out about it because I watched before I watched, Fast Times at Richmond High, the first time I saw it was, the joke about it in Christmas Vacation. And
Yeah,
then
I
I
haven't
came,
seen some of those. I haven't seen those earlier movies where she doesn't have any clothes on. I thought in Gremlins she was so adorable, like she and Billy.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
So imagining her as like a sex symbol is kind of difficult.
Oh yeah, she was one of the ones that was like that was like one of her known. She was like an '80s sex symbol, basically the same as like Farrah Fawcett in the early days. You know, it was that same people back then were like, oh my god, for her because she was in. I think she was in Fast Times at Ridgemont High. I think she was in St. Elmo's Fire. I think. I know she was in a lot of '80s films as like the leading, the girl that every guy's gonna have a poster of, and it was one of those things that she got out of the limelight is because she didn't want to she just wanted to step away from that and kind of just be a normal mom to her kids. She didn't want her kids to be like, oh yeah, your mom used to be a sex symbol back in the '80s. you know
Yeah, that might be a bit peculiar. If my mom had been in a movie with where she had done nudity, I imagine some kid being like, look what I saw a picture of your mom and like slugging the kid.
Oh yeah, I told my buddy, I said if they do not make this joke and Stranger Things at least one time, because they're getting in the timeline of where Winona Ryder was really famous. Beetlejuice, Heather's, and Edward Scissorhands. We're getting into the series is getting into that era of that era. And so I was like, if they don't make one joke of them going to a movie poster for Beetlejuice, or one of them and go, "Hey, Will, that looks like your mom," I'm gonna be so mad because the opportunity is there just to make a joke about because she was so big in the part of the era that they're basing the show in. She was big in the era, not to make a nod of, hey, that chick sort of looks like a young version of Will's mom.
This is like what, season 5 now. It would take me like months to binge it.
Oh yeah, they're the season. Yeah, yeah, yeah. The season 5 is the one that I think just dropped. No, wait, wait, yeah, no. Season 4 is the one that they just dropped. Season 5 is the coming series, is the one that's coming out, and it's supposed to be the last the last of the seasons. But they said that last time that this season was supposed to be the last one, and I'm like, yeah, I think it's going to be one of those. We're done making the series, and then Netflix is like, hey, here's a couple more $1 million for this property. Can you make another season? We'll pay you millions to come up with something else.
Well, there's this whole I'm only even vaguely aware of the plot. Isn't there this whole bigger universe involving the FBI and the Russians and stuff?
Yeah, a lot of it's to do with, I know at least for the first couple seasons it had to do with I don't know if you're familiar with the experiments that they did in the late '70s, early '80s with the MK Ultra. That the
Is that the men who stare at goats or putting people on LSD?
It's the one basically, yeah, where they would drug people up with LSD to see how it would affect their brain, to kind of use them as like using that brain wave to spy on other governments, using these people as guinea pigs with LSD.
Yeah, because you could just have a bunch of Cold War sci-fi shenanigans without the main cast if they don't want to do it anymore. Just set elsewhere in the world.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, if they want to keep going on and do a spin series without the main cast, without the kids, because there was a lot more going on with that MK Ultra, which a lot of people don't realize that was a real thing. Like some people are like, oh wait, that was a plot of the show. I'm like, yeah, but that actually happened. I'm like, they actually did that. And it's a lot of stuff where they can go into, there's a lot more they can explore as stuff that happened that were, that type of plot in the '80s. Because there's a lot of crazy stuff the government did in the '80s that people don't realize they did, that they could explore. I know, heck, they could even go, a more, if they wanted to go a more diverse version, they could go into, the the cocaine epidemic in the black communities. A lot of people don't realize that, in the '80s, to make quote unquote Reagan's war on drugs, they literally put in, made the drug cartels put drugs and get people hooked on crack in the '80s, and the low income African American, areas to make the war on drugs. So they, if they want to go a different route, there's so much they can do with, that 80s, you know, look at the dark that's going on where you're shopping at the mall, having a John Hughes montage. This is what's going on in the shadows. So there's a lot that they could play around
I
with.
was discussing online with somebody from a Facebook group. He came up with something called SDI punk. That's sort of a sci-fi version of the 80s. So it's like, have you ever seen the movie Firefox or read the book?
I've seen the film. I've seen the film.
Yeah, Clint Eastwood's got to sneak into the Soviet bloc and steal a telepathic Soviet superplane. Or
Yes,
like,
yes.
so there's a lot of like 80s sci-fi with like fighting the Russians in space. That Stranger Things could be like a young adult story set in that kind of genre.
Oh yeah, yeah. That's what I got from it, and a lot of that same stuff. I guess because I grew up with older siblings that grew up in the 80s, so it's weird. Like it's hitting a lot of. I know there's a lot of adults that show is hitting nostalgic for, but for me, it's also hitting that. And then now they're getting into the 90s, 90s, early 2000s, where I could see them doing a older version where now it's the kids or their kids, they could just keep going on like how they did what is it? They did one like kind of how the Wonder Years just did. They did a version where instead of being in the 70s based in the 80s, it's the Wonder Years where it's based in the 80s and 90s with a black family. And there's a lot of revenues they can do that same thing where instead of just being based in the 80s, they can make a spin-off series, where it's two of the characters, their kids in the 90s or in the 2000s to hit that nostalgia because that is now because people are a lot of people collect things and want to have that remembrance of quote unquote when things were okay or better. you know there was problems in every generation, but there's that play on everybody's nostalgia of the good times, so they
Well,
could
I
take a lot of spin-offs.
well, this is where I get political. I've told the kids, watch 80s movies because remember when air travel was less paranoid.
Oh yeah, it's crazy. I went on a plane in like 2010, and watching those movies you're like, oh yeah, this is simple, and then you go back and you're like, oh my god, this is I you don't you're not you're like, I'm not a terrorist, like I'm not, I know I have nothing on me, but like it still scares the shit out of you because you're like, oh god, I'm getting scanned, holy crap, I know I did nothing wrong but I feel like I did.
Yeah, yeah, I would consider myself pretty conservative. This is an area where I'd agree with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, abolish the TSA.
Yes, yes, yes.
No one is ever going to hijack a plane again. The passengers will beat them to death.
Exactly. And don't they have I think they have a guy now, like exactly like where it's like somebody who sits in the front seat who's like a marshal or like
Oh
law
yeah, air
enforcement.
marshals too. Like the Israelis had them first. That seemed like a good idea to have.
Hey, if somebody looks threatening, like have somebody on there that's actually armed. Like, doesn't that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, speaking of SDI stuff, I just sent you some posts from my ancient blogger blog that are either guest posts from that author I mentioned or like some of my own ideas how you could make like a instead of a steampunk or diesel punk an SDI punk like Top Gun. Have Gaddafi with like a super gun shelling Italy. And so Tom Cruise has got to take it out.
Sweet. Yeah, I'm definitely gonna check that out. That's definitely up my alley. Like I said, I love, anything that's, anything like that, that steampunky sort of cyberpunk thing. It's why I love RoboCop is one of my favorite movies. That's another one that's great when it comes, that technologically meets, the simpletonness of the 80s crime. I love that movie. So one let me so what is what's some other besides the praying mantis thing we talked about near the top of the conversation, what are some other genres that that you would love to explore?
I have started writing, but I haven't finished. It's kind of a how I would have done Star Trek, so it's somewhat more grounded. Like instead of that, pompous, we don't have money in the 23rd century kind of Picard talk. It's like the idea is the economy has gone full Andrew Yang. Most of it is automated, and there are not very many human jobs. Most of them are like super skilled. And so they sort of have a citizen's dividend to support people while they do other stuff. Like for example, the character in the book is the captain of a military spacecraft, but he's also a published historian. That's kind of what he did. But he wanted a bit, sort of lived on a citizen's stipend and wrote books. But then he ended up going to the space land version of Navy ROTC, and now he's a captain of a spaceship.
Sounds definitely up my alley. I love that concept because I've always, one of my favorite Star Trek series is Deep Space Nine, and they're like you said, they have the we don't have money in the 21st century, but then you watch Deep Space Nine, and you know how Quarks has you know has the lithium, in the blocks of gold. He's like, yeah, gold's worthless. We want the platinum, in the things. So I'm like, yeah, there is money still, and you still have that. So I
Yeah,
don't
and
understand,
plus, this is my kind of cynical take on the Vulcans. The Vulcan logic philosophy is so inimical to what they are naturally. The Vulcans naturally are the Romulans. So Surak, like the shows, like all the flashback stuff depicts him as basically being Jesus. What if he was Stalin?
It's a good take. I like that.
That Surak basically took over the planet and turned all the Vulcans into totalitarian slaves, living according to this code that doesn't really work with what they are naturally. And the Romulans are the ones who escaped.
Ooh, yeah, that's a good concept. I like that idea. Yeah, let me keep me updated on that because that is definitely something that I would be interested in for sure.
But this kind of gets my experience with some of the more ugly sides of internet culture that the not Vulcans eventually mellowed out, like Stalinism turned into Sweden, but the ones who fled never gave up their grudges. Like I used to be a member of a message board where these 4 or 5 people who were Polish who just hated the Germans and hated the Russians and kept getting banned and coming back under new names. They called them the Pole Trolls. So the rival civilization in my story are basically the Pole Trolls in space. They're people who have been wronged, but they have not given up on their grudges to a degree that's almost pathological.
Oh yeah, and it's that same concept that a lot of people make the joke. I know it's not always true, but people make the joke about the Ferengi are basically space Jews.
Or some sort of weird parody of the United States, the evil
Yes.
capitalists.
Oh yeah, about the corporate greed, about we'll sell your body for if it makes you a profit.
Of course, big noses and money don't really help matters.
Yes. Yeah, that is that I love anything that Star Trek adjacent, which that's goes back to my we talked about the new Star Wars films didn't turn out too great, and it's one reason that I kind of got into Star Trek again is because I've seen Star Trek my whole life and I know it was a thing, and there was always the Star Trek versus Star Wars, and I just sat down one day and I was like, all right, I'm not watching the new Star Wars films because they suck. So I'm gonna give the Star Trek thing, I'm gonna give this Star Trek a full my fandom. I'm gonna sit down and I'm gonna ingest it. And I came to the conclusion, I was like, okay, this is a lot better. This is a lot better than Star Wars. And I've always been like a Star Wars nut. And I'm like, okay, I think I became a Trekkie. This is a lot better written. The plot lines are, especially later on, the plot lines are a lot more realistic when it comes to dynamics and people's relationships and character growth than how some of the character growth happens in the Star Wars
Well,
films.
well, I liked the first of the new Trek with Chris Pine as a young Kirk, but I did not like what they did with Into Darkness. It's it's sort of like it was way too much of a rehash of the Wrath of Khan, even though Khan is such a cool character. Like what they should have done is they maybe could have had him. They found the Botany Bay, and they kind of enslave Khan a little bit, and maybe that's how he realized what it's like to be on the other end of the boot, and he and Kirk like become friends to escape, and then old Spock backstabs him. Only then Khan then backstabs everyone else because he's smarter than everyone.
Oh yeah, yeah. I'm the same way. I prefer, the in the J.J. Abrams movies. They have their place, but I stick more to the series. I'm just now discovering, Discovery, huh? I'm just now discovering Discovery show, and it's I'm still getting used to that one because it's a little different than what I'm used to because I'm more used to, the that's why I love the Picard series because it brings in, the next generation crew, and it also brings in, Voyager, Deep Space Nine, so all the 90s Star Trek. And so I'm kind of having it's a little different than, you know, what they're bringing into Discovery, which same thing like you were saying, there's one there's the newest one that just came out where it's basically if Kirk never was the captain and it was actually Captain Pike.
Oh, that one. I
Strange
haven't
New
watched
Worlds, I
any of
think.
this. Yeah, Strange New Worlds. I haven't watched any of the new stuff. Like the last Star Trek thing I saw was Beyond, which I thought was a great idea until the big twist, the reveal who Crawl was.
Yes.
I'm
Yes.
thinking, yeah, most soldiers hate war. He's the commercials made it sound like he was someone from a race outside the Federation that felt threatened by it. The expanding space democracy, absorbing everything. Yeah, he's the equivalent of like one of the Indian tribes. He doesn't want to get run over.
Oh yeah. Now
Like the
one
line,
thing,
the line, this is where the frontier pushes back. During the
yes.
Civil War, the Confederate armies, with the Texan troops were all fighting for the Confederacy elsewhere. The Comanche Indians were pushing the line back to the sea in a couple places. So that was a big wasted opportunity there with Crawl. To an outsider, the Federation is terrifying.
Yes. Now with those two, have you ever seen the two series is that I always recommend to, people too. Have you ever seen any episodes of Farscape or Babylon 5?
I did see some of Babylon 5, like some of the plot where they rebel against Earth because they got taken over by that fascist guy. And then, so they come in and they stop him from blowing up Earth out of spite. And then his vice president then tries to court martial Sheridan for staging a military coup that she was helping in. And he just kind of goes along with it, which I'm thinking that is the dumbest thing.
Yes. Which I
Yeah,
that's a
there's a whole
great
space fleet
series.
commanded by his wife up top. One word, and she gets glassed.
Oh yeah, and I always tell people too, like if you're a fan of how it comes back, a lot of people don't realize that the guys who wrote, Deep not Deep Space Nine, the guys who wrote Babylon 5 were actually a lot of the writers for Deep Space Nine. And so they took a lot of their thing was, okay, we have the same concept. You're on a spaceship, not spaceship, but a star station. And how can we take, there was a lot of things that they couldn't do on Star Trek because, you had, there was stuff that was the easy way out to write something. You could go, okay, I can transport him using your transporter. I could use this, I could use that. So they're like, well, what if we had this, but they didn't have transportation technology? So everything they had to go down to the planet or they had to travel, they had to use it, they had to use a shuttle. So why don't we do that? So it was basically like Babylon 5 is Deep Space Nine if they didn't have some of the caveats to hold them back inside the Star Trek realm of what we know as Star Trek fundamentals. And it's
Yeah, I remember. It's my understanding Babylon 5 was basically a bunch of people from Star Trek who decided, where this is how we would do it.
yeah, it was the co-creator and the lead head writer. It was the co-creator, the guy who created it, and one of the head and two or three of the head writers from that wrote on Next Gen and wrote on Deep Space are the ones who created Babylon 5. So basically, yeah, that's what it was. It was basically like, hey, this is if we didn't have the perimeters of Star Trek, this is what we would have done for Deep Space Nine.
Mm-hmm.
And then Farscape, that is a that show is so amazing. I don't know if you know the concept of the show Farscape or not.
Yeah, a friend of mine was really into Farscape and it was on, but I never really watched it.
It's really good. It takes that whole, everybody's like, oh, I want to be abducted by aliens or all this stuff. It takes that concept of, well, what would happen if you really did? If you were thrown into this world of extraterrestrials and different planets and dimensions, how would you react and could you adapt to survive, or could you give up, everything you ever known and everything you ever loved? Could you move on with a new life and start something new? And that concept I thought was really cool. And then in throughout the series, they tease a little bit of like, oh, he's going to get back to home. He's going to get back to Earth. There's going to be a portal. He's going to get back. And it's just enough to where he gets that glimpse of, this is what I used to, but now I'm so immersed where I'm in now, I don't want to go back. For a long time, I wanted to go back, but now where I am, I don't want to go back because I love where I ended up. So I always
Mm-hmm.
recommend that series too. So that is another amazing sci-fi series. And one thing they did too that I love that I haven't seen anybody else do is the ship itself is an actual like living being that it can control itself, and it cuts them off and different stuff, and it just has a alien that is planted inside of it that they work together to control how the ship works, and it translates the ship into what like the crew can understand, like it speaks for the ship. And I thought that was a cool concept for the series. And it's plus it's a lot of people don't realize the show was produced by the Jim Henson Company. So, and I always loved Jim Henson and anything to do with puppetry and Muppets. So that's a that's another reason if you ever want to give it a go, just because it's a Jim Henson project, give it a go as well.
Speaking of Jim Henson, that alternate history forum I used to be a member of, that's when the pole trolls came from. Someone did a whole alternate history about Jim Henson buying into Disney in the early 80s when he was doing very well and Disney was not. I just sent you on Facebook the TV tropes page. It's called A Hippie in the House of Mouse. It's like a whole alternate world. And it is really fascinating. Like the person who wrote it clearly knows their history of Disney and Jim Henson in the late 70s and early 80s.
But that sounds awesome. Yeah, I'm definitely going to check that out. That is definitely up my alley because
And
I'm into that type of alternate history thing. Like, what if, like I think there was a series a couple years ago. I can't remember what it's called. I think it's like the Red Tower or something, but it's like, what if it was either the Russians or the Nazis? It was like, what
it's the
if
Man
they
in the High
won?
Castle, I think, and that's the Nazis, I think.
Yeah, and it was a good. I watched some of it, and I was like, wow, that is crazy. But that's a good
That
way of like, what if they won?
Yeah, that's not. There's a much more plausible one for the early '90s called Fatherland, where the Germans have beaten Russia, the U.S. has beaten Japan, so we have a Cold War with them. And the dying Hitler recognizes everything is falling apart, so he tries to make peace with the U.S. So he's having all the surviving camp guards and people involved in the Holocaust, because at this point the Jews are all dead. So he's having them killed to cover it up. And they made it into an HBO show with Rutger Hauer.
Oh, I'm definitely going to check that out. That
Yeah,
is
because that seems a bit more realistic than the Nazis getting here with no navy. I think Man High Castle, I think, was trying to comment about like racism in America.
that's what I got from it too. Now that you say that, I was thinking that same thing too because I was like, wait a minute, but then the Navy thing, I'm like, that makes no sense. How does that? So I see what you mean from that. That's definitely what I think happened too. So yeah, I'm definitely check out. So what is the name again of that series? So I
The
can when I
book and the movie are both called Fatherland. Fatherland, I think someone might have just posted the whole movie on YouTube. Shows how
sweet.
much HBO cares, I suppose.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm gonna check that out because that is definitely, like I said, I love, being a history nerd. I love stuff like that, the alternate history. Like I was explaining to my fiance because we were talking about, the American history stuff they have at Disney. And I was like, yeah, I've always been a weird history kid. I was like, the people at Disney didn't like me. And she was like, what do you mean? I was like, we went into the thing with they have a I think it's like it's artifacts, but it's not real ones, it's replicas of the real things. And they had George Washington's teeth. And as a lot of people who were taught in the American school system, as you know, being a teacher, George Washington's teeth, were made of wood and he had the spring gums. What people don't really know is that's not actually the whole truth. George Washington's gums were wooden, but his teeth were actually, air quotes here, given to him by the slaves. So his teeth were real, actual teeth, but the gums were wooden. But that doesn't look as good to our founding father that he stole the teeth of slaves to put in his own mouth.
Okay, wooden gums. I'm gonna have to look into that because I'm just how ganked up would your mouth have to be? You have to have wooden gums.
Well, it wasn't like a gum. It was basically like it was like the first ever like dentures. Like it was
Oh,
yeah, it was like a pair of dentures where they basically, instead of having like now where they're like, I forget, I don't know what they're made of now, but that part was wooden and the teeth were ones that he
oh,
had
so
put in there.
oh yeah, I'm seeing that. I'm seeing that now. Wooden teeth myth at mountainvernon.org. So it does
Yeah.
look like dentures, and they're yeah, ivory, gold, lead, and human teeth. Yeah, lead. Oh boy,
Yeah, and
that
so a
can't
lot
be
of
healthy.
they so yeah, so a lot of people they were like, yeah, in the history books they said, yeah, with the full wooden. I'm like, no, that's not what it was. He stole from those. Like I said, it says in the history, they were given to him, but I'm like, yeah, we know how that went down. That is not. They didn't just give you their teeth. And like I always tell people, I'm like, yeah, the history books, yeah, they're written by the victors, and they're not gonna slander somebody like that. So yeah, that's not the real story. And so she was laughing because I was like, yeah, as a 10-year-old kid at Disney, the guide was looking at me like, shut up, kid. I'm trying to do my spick here for the Disney, but I'm like, that's not true. That's this is actually what happened. Joked her. I was like, it was definitely a Sheldon Cooper moment. What websites and stuff can people find your books, or where can
All
they
right,
find your books at?
all right. The ebooks for The Thing in the Woods, The Atlanta Incursion, Battle for the Wasteland, Son of Grendel, and Serpent Sword are Kindle Unlimited. So the ebooks are Amazon exclusive. So for now, the ebooks are all on Amazon. The print books you can get lots of different places because they're I use expanded distribution on Amazon. So Ingram will send print books like Books a Million and Barnes and Noble and all that, but you'd have to order them special. You can't get them in a bookstore.
We'll send them your way so they can, get all your books and stuff. Because I definitely highly recommend anybody who's looking to get any of your stuff. I highly recommend your stuff. Thanks again for coming on. All right, everyone. That's going to be another episode of the Phantom Squad podcast. Would you like to see our outro? We always say, enjoy the madness.
Enjoy the madness.